Hello, this is Thinking Out Loud with Ian Currey. At this time of year, a lot of my friends, having made New Year's resolutions, are a few days into those promises they made with themselves. You know, the stop doing this or start doing that kind of promise. And it's a very long list, isn't it? A very predictable list too. And without being negative at all, I know that soon, very likely many of those same friends are going to be feeling very disappointed with broken promises. I decided long ago to do something else instead. Come on, let me tell you what I think. As a parent, have you ever heard, "But Dad, you promised"? Those are some of the hardest words to hear as a parent, aren't they? On the few occasions I heard them, it was always because something had come along to make whatever it was impossible. But it's still a horrible feeling just the same, whoever's fault it is. One of the many lessons I learned from my dad was never make a promise that you cannot keep. Something to do with integrity or something like that. Integrity, now there's a word. It's rather a difficult one to explain for most people. But mostly it means doing what you say you will or being honest with your actions. For a child, though, a broken promise can be devastating. Sometimes it's just in the middle of busy and we forget that seemingly unimportant things are a child's whole life at that moment in time. There's nothing quite like the gut-wrenching feeling of those "but Dad, you promised" words, except perhaps the hollow "I'll make it up to you" response that so many end up resorting to. Oof. Broken promises are horrible, aren't they? Especially to a small child. But none of us like broken promises, even as grown-ups. And a resolution is another way of saying, "I promise," or "I promise myself," which might be why we feel so bad when we fail to keep a resolution. But perhaps another way of looking at it might be to look at a reboot, a way of starting over. This computer is one we used years ago in England. The boys used to complete assignments on it and research for school projects and so on. Over time, it's found itself used less and less until I moved things around the other day and thought I'd find a use for it. But do you think I could remember any of the passwords? No. I tried everything. The only thing for it was a clean start. And actually, after as long as it had been, I don't know why I didn't just start again in any case. I think mostly it was because I didn't want to be beaten by my own memory. And even though the computer was probably less than ideal after so long, I was absolutely determined not to be beaten by it. The funny thing was that I resigned myself to the idea of having to give it up and start all over again and lose the content that might have been stored there. I restarted the computer as part of the start again process, and right when the machine booted, I was distracted by something, and instead of holding down a series of keys, standing on one leg and putting a thumb in my left ear or something, you know, those weird instructions you get to do these kind of reboot things. Well, instead of all that, I forgot what I was doing and entered a password, and it just worked. Maybe I've been thinking too hard. But whatever happened, I got a second chance. Whew. It was a close one. Both of these things, though, the broken promises and the computer reboot, are things that we're all very familiar with in one way or another. And when it comes to password forgetfulness, well, that can cause, well, cold sweats in no time, can't it? Did you know that God is very good at forgetting things? He does that when we ask him to. There's a song that we used to sing as children that had the lines, "Buried in the deepest sea, yes, that's good enough for me." Don't worry, I won't sing it for you. But it was talking about where God says he will bury our iniquities. And that's just another way of saying things we know are wrong. And when we say we are sorry and ask him to forgive us, he says, "I'll bury them." Let me show you. It's found in the book of Micah, chapter 7. "Once again, you will have compassion on us. You will trample our sins under your feet and throw them into the depths of the ocean." That's quite a descriptive way of saying God forgets our sins when we ask him to, isn't it? But while we're here, do you notice the first two words? Once again. God deals with this over and over again. We'll see that again later. But God is also very good at promises too. You will never find yourself saying, "But God, you promised." Last time we were looking at the Christmas story. I quoted the first part of John chapter 1 to you. Do you remember? I said in that video the whole Bible is one long reality script. Well, all the way at the other end of the New Testament are three short sections called 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. These seem to be letters, but they aren't like most of the other letters that make up parts of the Bible. But while that's all interesting, the main thing is that the same script follows all the way here and is again at the end of the New Testament, just as it was at the beginning. The very first verse here says, "We proclaim to you the one who existed before the beginning, whom we have heard and seen. We saw him with our own eyes and touched him with our own hands. He is the word of life." And that sounds a lot like the start of the Christmas story we heard last time all over again, doesn't it? If you read the next few verses, you see what I mean, I'm sure. These little books are fun ones to read because ever so many familiar things are hiding in the short chapters. You know, the sort of thing where you say, "Oh, that's where that comes from. Oh, that's where that verse is." Things like God is light, and you'll find that in 1 John 1 verse 5. And I'm sure we'll come back to look at that one of these days too. Love one another can be found in 1 John 2 verse 7. And Christ existed from the beginning, 1 John 2 verse 13. There's so much in these little chapters. There's so many good things to find, as well as one or two things that have kept theologians guessing forever. But the verse I was looking for today is at the end of 1 John chapter 5. "Dear children, keep away from anything that might take God's place in your hearts." So with resolutions, instead of deciding not to do something or to do something else that I perhaps haven't been doing, I always pray a prayer asking God to help me do the right thing, the next right thing, that will keep me from wandering off. In other words, keep doing what we know works. There really isn't a magic formula to success in life. Instead, though, there is a simple prayer I often use that simply says, "Lord, show me the next right thing to do and help me to do that instead of anything else." Because the anything else stuff will doubtless take God's place in my heart eventually. The reboot we talked about is sometimes a good thing with computers. My clever computer friends tell me that it helps get rid of all the junk and things that clutter things up and slowing everything down. When I thought about our verse today, that sort of made sense. Dear children, Keep away from anything that might take God's place in your hearts. Rebooting our lives, or checking to see if the main thing is still the main thing, is so important, isn't it? Instead of promising ourselves we will eat less chocolate or eat more salad, perhaps we might do well to have a think about what are the things that we know are important to us, but somehow we still manage to let them get crowded out. What are the things that you would say are important to you? Things like family or God and relationships and so on. What is in the way of those things being kept as the most important to you? Our verse today says, "Dear children, keep away from anything that might take God's place in your hearts." But we also looked at a verse in Micah chapter 7. Do you remember? "Once again, you have compassion on us. You will trample our sins under your feet and throw them into the depths of the ocean." I love that verse. Earlier I said we'd look at those first two words again. Once again. God has put them there because he knows we need them. We need them over and over again. The Bible is very good at joined up thinking that runs right through the whole Bible from beginning to end. This verse in Micah meshes neatly with another in 1 John chapter 1. "But if we confess our sins to him, he is faithful and just to forgive our sins and cleanse us from all wickedness." I have a friend who calls this his windscreen wiper verse. And what he means by that is that when clutter gets in there and takes God's place in our hearts, we can turn to this verse and apply it. Confess those things to God that have taken his place, and he is faithful to apply the once again words as he always does, and we can move on. As we start a new year, a reboot is always a good thing. Asking God to help us keep him the main thing. And of course, when we do that, everything else will mesh and fall nicely into place. Did you notice I've rebooted my thinking chair? A lot of the clutter had to be taken away so I could make some repairs to the room. And I rather like it, don't you? I'm sure I'll manage to put up some pictures and fill the shelves again. But a clean start was a nice byproduct of having to make repairs. A reboot. Let me know how you reboot. And if you haven't done so already, click that subscribe button. I'd love to hear your comments. Let me know how you use these videos, and perhaps you'd like to tell me what you think about. Until next time, this has been another episode of Thinking Out Loud with Ian Currey. Goodbye.